Hey, good morning, Facebook Live. This is Justin Villery from the Committee of 70, and I am here with our next installment of Philly Youth Vote Taking Over Studio C70. So let me introduce Tom Quinn, teacher at Central High School, and Mr. Quinn, go ahead and take it away.
Great, thank you, Justin. So we have Jill Beck here, who is a candidate for the Superior Court. And she's going to be interviewed by my students at Central High School. And I'm going to let them take it away from here. But Ms. Beck, would you like to just introduce yourself to start off with?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. I have really looked forward to this interview. My name is Jill Beck. I am from Allegheny County, and I am a candidate for Superior Court on the Democratic ballot.
Great. And so, Yuma, you have the first question.
Good morning. My name is Yuma. And the question I have for you is, beyond a law degree, what do you believe qualifies you to be a judge?
I think that's a great question, Yuma. Thank you very much. I think that my background working in social services has been really critical and will be a critical set of skills that I will bring to the bench. I did not go to law school right out of college. I actually didn't think about going to law school right away. I was originally going to go into a social service field. When I was in college, I worked with kids who were adjudicated delinquent, had been convicted of a crime, and placed in a residential center. And I worked closely with them in their placement and came to realize just how many of these kids had prior abuse and neglect and trauma. And I wanted to dig deeper and work with kids to try to help address that, to try to keep them out of the juvenile justice system and the criminal justice system. And so it was from there that I actually went to work in a hospital setting doing what's called forensic interviewing of kids who were allegedly abused. And I really enjoyed that work, especially assisting the interviews and watching the interviewers testify in court. But I found it to be very narrow. And so I wanted to kind of go beyond that. And so I did a year of AmeriCorps service working with kids on probation in the Washington, D.C. suburbs in Maryland. And it was there that I actually decided to go to law school because I was very heavily involved in these kids' lives. I was helping them with their school attendance, getting them to medical appointments, mental health appointments, helping them with their probation requirements, also doing community activities with them and some community service. But I was testifying a lot in court, and I was very frustrated working the job that I was working because the judges were not always listening to my colleagues and me who knew these kids best. They were listening to the lawyers. And many of these lawyers had, I'm sure, very high caseloads, but were meeting these kids in the hallway. And so it was my determination to go to law school to be the kind of attorney who would really get to know my clients so that I could really advocate for what they needed and help them to achieve substantial justice. And so I think that that sort of experience and my desire to really help people and to dig deep and to learn what people need in order to further their case is something that is going to be really critical on the bench. It also gives me a level of empathy that I think will be really helpful, because I think empathy is an extremely important trait of a sitting judge, including on the appellate courts.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Beck. Kiana? So important to connect with the youth, huh?
Greetings. My name is Kiana. And the question I have for you is, what are the biggest changes you think we need to make to the justice system?
Well, I think we could sit here all day, Kiana, and talk about that. I think there's a lot of changes that I would love to see made. I think a lot of the times what we see in the justice system is it's a blanket system designed to address individualized needs. And anytime you have that in any system, the child welfare system, the justice system, any of the systems, that's a really challenging thing to be able to fulfill. I think our criminal code tries to address that by requiring sentencing to be individualized and to address each individual defendant's needs. And I think that happens with varying levels of success. So I think that concretely what I can bring in differences that I think can be made is first requiring every decision maker from the arbitrator all the way up to the Supreme Court justice to participate in implicit bias training. I think that will be a good first step to helping to even the playing field in the justice system. I think another thing that needs to happen all the time is that on appeal, especially for the court that I'm running for, because we do hear appeals from criminal cases, to ensure that the facts as found by the court are satisfied by the record, that the evidence presented and the testimony presented do support what the trial court found, and that the law supports the decision and the outcome. And that's more than just making sure that each element of the crime was proven. I think that especially for sentencing, ensuring that the punishment fits the crime, that the factors that were considered when fashioning the sentence don't go beyond the permissible factors, that somebody's gender, race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, that none of that factored in to the sentencing, because those are not permissible factors to consider. And I think that is the role of the appellate court judge, to ensure that the law was followed and that the sentence is appropriate and is correct under the law.
Thank you.
Anyaka, you're muted.
I was waiting for your cue. Sorry, Mr.
No, you don't have to wait for my cue. You guys can go.
Hi, my name is Neki Moini. How will you handle conflicts of interest on the bench?
Yeah, so when a judge is asked to consider a conflict of interest, or she herself identifies a conflict of interest, it is for that judge to decide whether there is one. And I take that very seriously. There is the standard is an appearance of bias, an appearance of impropriety. And so I think that any time that my neutral role is questioned, I will consider that very seriously. I think that I will have the ability to set aside relationships and people I know and things that I'm interested in the name of making a legally supportable decision. But certainly I will always be very mindful of conflicts, and I will ensure that that the public can have confidence in the decisions that are reached by the Superior Court. I think that is critical when it comes to identifying conflicts and ensuring that I recuse myself when appropriate.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Alexis. What changes would you make to ensure equal justice for all?
Yeah, I touched on that just a little bit with the implicit bias training. I think that it's really important. When I made the decision that I wanted to possibly pursue a run for the Superior Court, one of the first things I did was sign up for implicit bias training. Again, I know it is not the beginning and the end of the question, but it's a great first step because it helps everyone, because everyone has implicit bias. There's things that are just sort of under the surface that impact your decisions, that impact the way you think about things. And I found it really helpful. I did a 6-hour course and, learned different tools and tricks to confront the biases that I likely have under the surface. So I think that is first. Another is, again, that full, fair, and thorough review. That can't be stressed enough. And it's not just in the criminal justice system. I spent many years working in the child welfare system, and I saw it there too, that somebody's gender, or religion or race or ethnicity or gender identity made them more likely to be involved in these systems than, more majority individuals. And I think that that is problematic just in and of itself. And so having judges in the reviewing role, because the Superior Court is an error correcting court, it is a court that is, the facts, the witnesses, the evidence, all that happens below, and it comes up to the Superior Court on paper. And it is really important that the Superior Court judge, the panel that's reviewing it, it's reviewed usually in 3 judge panels, that they review what happened below, that they make sure that none of these improper factors were considered together. I tell this story sometimes on the campaign trail just because I think that this is really, it was an uncanny coincidence, but so important and really speaks to this issue. When I was working representing children, abused and neglected children, I coincidentally had 2 cases come in that were about 3 weeks apart. The first one was a Black woman who had smoked marijuana. She fell asleep, and sadly, something happened to her baby. Thankfully, the baby was okay, but the agency got involved and brought it to court. And it was decided that the child would stay in the mother's care, but the mother would undergo a drug and alcohol evaluation and a parenting evaluation to make sure that the baby could be safely in her care. And we would review the case again in a few months. Sounded pretty reasonable. Everyone was okay with it, and we moved on. A few weeks later, again, pure coincidence, a white woman had taken Ambien without a prescription, fell asleep. Sadly, something happened to her baby. Thankfully, the baby was okay. But this time, the recommendation was to dismiss the case. And I was shocked. I think I was in my 20s at the time. And I said, we just had this exact case. This exact same case was just before the court just a few weeks ago. And just like in that case, the same thing needs to happen here. The mother needs to can keep the baby in her care. The mother should undergo drug and alcohol evaluation and parenting evaluation. And we should come back in a few months and make sure that everything is okay and go from there. And the court did ultimately agree. But that was a really stark reminder to me of how important it is that the people involved in the case be vigilant, ensure that biases, that improper factors, as I mentioned before, that these things do not enter into the decision-making process. What we had before us in those 2 cases, identical, the exact same thing. Somebody using a drug illegally, resulting in the neglect of a child and a child getting injured. End of story. And so, having that knowledge and having that experience will make me vigilant when reviewing these cases to ensure that the Superior Court is a court where justice truly is for all. I know that the justice really only occurs when the least of us are treated the same as the most of us. And that is something that I will steadfastly apply and hold on to on the bench.
Thank you. So important. We have Georgia coming up next. Ready, Georgia? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Georgia. And my question is, what pro bono and community services are you a part of, and what is your role?
Great question. Pro bono and community service are my favorite activities. In fact, I most recently on the pro bono front, I started my career representing abused and neglected children at a public service agency. It was not pro bono work, but it basically was. It was a very intense job, and I loved really every minute of it. It was really great. And when I went to the court, I wasn't allowed to do any pro bono work, but I did a lot of community service and public service, which I'll talk about in a minute. When I went into private practice, I started to do protection from abuse cases for our local civil legal aid organization. And I did that on at least a monthly basis. I was doing helping people who were experiencing housing insecurity, people who are going to lose their homes during COVID. I did that for about, a couple months. I did nonpartisan voter protection and election work. I did, I did a lot of work actually helping people just who had no money get the same rights and protections as people who do. I did that work on the criminal side by starting a relationship with our local public defender. Following the murder of George Floyd, I created a project for my law firm to help with the representation of the people who were arrested in those protests. I knew that the public defender was going to be flooded with these cases, and funding being what it is, they were going to have some difficulty because a lot of that evidence that was coming in was photographs and videos, and that takes a lot of storage space that I figured the public defender might not have. So I started this project where we would help them review cases. We would gather, store, and synthesize the evidence, get it ready for trial, and then second chair some of those trials where appropriate. I think like so many people, last summer following the murders that occurred, I felt helpless. And so this was my way of trying to add my time, my treasure, my talents to something good, to advance something I truly believed in, which was, helping people to exercise their right to protest these murders. I did this also in appellate courts across the country on a different scale. I worked representing a group who was supporting a criminal defendant having the right to counsel at an initial bail hearing, because we know how critical a stage the initial bail hearing is in a criminal matter. That was in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Galveston, Texas. I also represented a group who were supporting a defendant in the New Jersey Supreme Court. This criminal defendant lived in a rooming house as opposed to a single family home. So that's, those are homes where individuals live in individual bedrooms, but they share a kitchen and a bathroom and living spaces, but they often will padlock their rooms because it's their own private living space. And it was, the police had entered that house, the structure, without a warrant. And it was our argument that the Fourth Amendment, which prohibits the police from doing that, they have to first get a warrant or have certain circumstances that allow them to do that. It was our argument that it applies in rooming house situations because it is just a single family home for people who can't afford to live on their own. And what should the difference be there? I likened it in my writings, I likened it to college students living together, sharing a house. Or if you're familiar, this might be dating me a little bit, the Golden Girls. People, grown-ups who live together, share living space, you wouldn't expect that they wouldn't be protected by the Constitution. And on that one, I'm very proud to say that the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed, and is now the law in New Jersey, that police must first get a warrant before entering a rooming house, absent certain circumstances. I also did this on the civil side. As you may be aware, there are people who can comfortably afford to pay an attorney to help them for all their different legal needs. And then there are certain people who are entitled to have free legal services for certain legal needs. There's a really large group in between of people who don't fit into either category. And so I reached out to my local civil legal aid organization and said, hey, tell me the top 10 cases that you see of people who have to go into court by themselves without a lawyer. And what we did was create what we called legal fact sheets, single page, simple bullet points, explaining to people what they could expect to see. I thought that was critical and important because it allowed them to go in prepared. We also drafted certain paperwork that they could fill in all their information so that they could go into court ready and the judge would hopefully hear their case. These were cases like postponing a sheriff's sale of somebody's home, Social Security matters, filing for a simple divorce. I did some research and some advisory work for Ceasefire PA and a few other nonprofits. On the community service front, I've done a lot of community service work. For many years, I have judged high school moot court competitions, which I love because I always tell them, and it's true, they put my colleagues to shame with their knowledge of the rules of evidence. And it's really fun to see students who are so engaged and excited about the law. For many years, for about a decade or more, I've lectured to high school students in a program through my bar association called Stepping Out, and talk about individuals' rights and responsibilities as they turn 18. You know, everything from buying a car, renting an apartment, getting a job, you know, things that they can expect to see and what their role in it will be. I think probably the biggest one and the most significant one I did, though, was something called Sue's Run for Kids. My mom was a lifelong runner and my inspiration for wanting to help people. She was a social worker at our local children's hospital for 19 years, where she was in the neonatal and pediatric intensive care unit. So she worked with the really little and really sick babies. And she was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and fought that heroically for 2.5 years, all the while running, you know, keeping up her exercise. Now, I was never a runner myself, but after she passed away, I wanted to continue her legacy. And so I started an event called Sue's Run for Kids. And my mom's name was Sue. And it raised money for kids in the foster care system, specifically for teenagers, for kids who were going to be aging out, helping them with various needs that these kids had, because these were a very vulnerable but often overlooked population. We did the race for 7 years. It was a huge undertaking. My dad and I did it together, so that made it really special. And we raised a lot of money actually doing this race, and it was also really fun. We turned it into a total party, family-friendly party. We had a balloon twisting magician, a face painter, activities, tons of food, great swag. It was really fun. So that's probably my biggest undertaking. We had about 60 volunteers, about 10, 15 vendors. It was long days, long nights, early mornings, but all worth it. It was something I really loved to do.
Good morning. My name is Camilla Verdugo, and my question is, how will you balance being an independent judge and an elected official?
It's a great question. And I think that comes with the confusion, you know, of this being a partisan, you know, you have to run on a ticket election for what is really a nonpartisan role. You know, I will not sit on the Superior Court as a Democrat. I will sit on the court as a judge. And so, you know, certainly I bring with me, you know, I am a registered Democrat, lifelong Democrat, but, and I will bring with me the values that have come with me through my experiences. But I really don't see it as a balancing act. I mean, certainly as an elected official, I have an obligation to serve with ethics and integrity and to work hard for the people who supported me, elected me, and the taxpayers who are paying for this. I have an obligation to the litigants and to the attorneys to treat them with kindness and respect and to do justice well on the court and to put in the time, effort, and energy to do the job right. But, you know, truly, I see my role as a sitting judge as encompassing all of that. I don't view this as balancing partisanship or, you know, a role as an elected official with being a judge, because I think that once I am elected, I am a judge, and all of that is encompassed in that role. And I think that is the nice thing and really important thing about judges not having to run in contested elections once they are on the bench, because I think to your point of your question is a good one. Judges should not be politicians. We don't have constituents. We are looking out for the interests of the Commonwealth. We are beholden to the law, and we are representing the entire Commonwealth, and we are ruling for the good of the Commonwealth. And so I think that is a really important point, because having judges run in what are called retention elections, should we keep Jill Beck as a Superior Court judge, as opposed to having me run as an incumbent against other, people who want to take my spot. I think it's really important that we allow judges to be judges and not make them politicians.
Hi, my name is Tina, and my question for you is, why is it important for young people to vote?
Well, your vote is your voice. And so if you want to see certain changes made, and I mean, so far, I will tell you truthfully, this is one of the best interviews and most comprehensive interviews I've had through the primary season. I mean, you all have a voice, you all have a position, you all have things that you care about. And it's important that you have elected officials, everyone from the most local all the way up to your president and everything in between. You have people who reflect those values, serving you, representing you, and working for you. I think that is key. It's really, really easy to complain about what's happening in government and what people are or are not doing. But this is your voice. This is the way that you can make a change and make that happen.
Thank you so much, Jill Beck, candidate for Superior Court, for joining us. Do you have any last words you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I thank you so much for having me. It really is a pleasure. And this is such a nice way to spend the day before the primary, talking to folks and to, answering these questions. I really appreciate the thought you put into it. And, I hope I answered them at least somewhat satisfactorily. It's really great to see engagement like this. I will tell you the truth. These sort of things weren't on my radar in high school. And I'm endlessly impressed with young people like you who are engaged in the process. Keep being engaged, keep doing this. Everyone says you are the future. I mean, really, you're now. You're the ones. You can make the change. If you guys get out there and vote and ensure that your elected officials are doing what you want them to do, and if they're not, speaking up about it, you can really make a change. And I think that anyone who underestimates you guys is really on a fool's errand. I thank you so much for having me. And for those of you who are 18, I hope if you haven't voted already by mail, I hope you do vote tomorrow. Thank you so much for having me. Jill Beck for Superior Court.
Thank you so much, Jill Beck. We really appreciate you actually engaging with the students, because I think that's really important, is have the candidates talk to the students. This is part of a series. We're interviewing candidates in all of the elections, as many candidates as we can from both parties. And we've been working with Committee of 70, so we want to thank Committee of 70 very much for hosting this on their Facebook page. You can find out more information about all the judges at the judicial ratings on the PA Bar Association's website at pavotesmart.com. Better Civics Judicial Elections Toolkit has a lot of campaigns and connections to the judges pages. There are pages. You can still find out where your polling place is. Too late to get a mail-in ballot, but not too late to actually turn it in at one of the mail-in or the ballot boxes around the city. Okay, and if you want to get involved with PA Youth Vote and getting other students in other schools out to vote around the state, please contact us. And thank you very much again, Ms. Beck, and good luck in your campaign.
Thank you very much.